Hey everyone. All right, so let's talk about AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. Right? So everyone's talking about AIPAC right now. It was a Macklemore's song. I just saw a post by Slow Factory about it. Now it's AIPAC that's behind the TikTok ban, apparently. So I think it's important to understand what it is and make sure that we're not using it improperly, right? So there's a big problem with the way that AIPAC is being portrayed. It's being portrayed as a completely separate entity to the US empire, the US UK empire, the Christian empire that's been around for over 900 years. So let's talk about this empire, right? So the first actions of this empire was to go and try and control Palestine, right? So they left Europe and they created these military campaigns called the Crusades. They said that they were going to save Jerusalem from the Muslims, right? And from Muslim rule. And so very fundamentally racist from the get-go. This is the origin of Islamophobic messaging. Right, so we have this empire that started over 900 years ago, and then we have AIPAC that started in 1951, so 70 years ago. And so it's a little bit problematic that people are saying, well, AIPAC is, this big, powerful organization. So let's look at how empire works. There's a lot to unpack here, but we need to understand that this empire has never stopped trying to get back control of Palestine. So the Crusades were overall a major failure, but they were able to create the Kingdom of Jerusalem for about 88 years. And that was something that they never got over. And the reason they wanted to control that region is not really because of the Muslims are pushing that back. It's because they wanted control of the trade routes. I mean, if you look even at Christopher Columbus, right? No one would have funded Christopher Columbus if the Crusades had been successful, because they would be holding the trade routes and controlling the trade that goes through Palestine to Asia, which is something that they've been trying to reestablish for a long time. Even, there was a secret agreement during World War I that got revealed by the Bolsheviks because the Russians were party to it, but it was the Sykes-Picot Agreement. It was between the French and the British and the Russians. And even here you see this desire to create another trade route from India through the Levant to the Mediterranean. And even now you just had Biden and Modi, the Prime Minister of India, talk about the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, or the IMEC for short. And so it's this dream of controlling trade and passing trade through the Levant has never ended. It's part of the reason that they are normalizing relationships or getting normalized relationships with between Israel and Gulf states, because even now, even though the IMEC hasn't been completely established, they're still using the same route essentially to get around the Houthi blockade, which is why the Houthis have expanded the reach of their blockade through the air, and they're not just attacking ships going through the Red Sea, but they're targeting any ships that get anywhere near the Israeli ports. So what they're doing is, instead, they're unloading in Dubai and passing, and then driving through Saudi Arabia and Jordan to pass goods, right? So it's just another way to get around the blockade, because the only demands of the blockade is to end the genocide and help Palestinians, but that's too much for capitalists and for the empire. So this is something that's been ongoing for a super long time, and what we're seeing happening with AIPAC has happened before, right? So the first time we see this happening, this putting a Jewish face on empire, is around the 1600s, when after trying to remove Jewish people from Europe many, many times, they're constantly being, displaced and murdered. My family was kicked out of Iberia. We ended up in Morocco. That was my patrilineal line. My other ancestors are from many other places. But they kind of gave up on that, and they gave up on the Inquisition as well. And so what's something interesting about the Inquisition, just to go off on a tangent really quickly, is that it happens at the same time as Columbus's first voyage. And Columbus was born just after the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Empire. So this feeling of like wanting to reconquer, Palestine is still part of the psyche. But if the Crusades had been successful, then they wouldn't have needed to explore and find different routes. No one probably would have funded Columbus's adventures into the great big unknown and take the risk that, he would end up somewhere. But in his own journals, he's talking about amassing riches that will allow for a new crusade and a new attempt to retake Jerusalem. But, that's 1492. So about 100 years later, you have Sir Francis Kett. That's, has a new revelation for everyone. And the new revelation is that actually, now that the printing press has made text available and it's no longer word of mouth, it's become clear to him that the Jewish people are the chosen people and that the land of Israel belongs to them. And I'm not agreeing that we're the chosen people. That's his theory. And what do they do to him? They burn him at the stake because they want to be the chosen people. They want Palestine to be their land that they're destined for. But fast forward less than 100 years, you have this new idea. It's like, okay, well, maybe we embrace this idea that Jewish people need to be in Palestine in order for the end times to happen, right? Let's put their face on our attempts to control Palestine. And they talk about the restoration of the Jews, right? You have people like Thomas Brightman and Sir Henry Finch talking about restoring the Jews. And this ideology is also brought over on the Mayflower with the Puritans, because that's who this group was that started talking about their relocation. And so it's been part of the American psyche, this idea of Zionism, this idea of relocating the Jewish people to Palestine to bring around the end times, has been part of the American psyche since the Mayflower, since pretty much day one. And so, that's the first time that happens. And Jewish people aren't interested, aren't involved, but around the beginning of the 19th century, so decades before Herzl was even born, you have the emergence from a Scottish clergyman, Sir Alexander Keith, who comes up with this land without a people for a people without a land narrative. You have Darby that comes up with dispensationalism, and then you have Lord Shaftesbury, who starts advocating for the British Empire to take an interest in Palestine and to start relocating Jewish people to Palestine. And at the same time, in the United States, you have the Blackstone Memorial, which is, again, while advocating for Jewish people to go live in Palestine, also, like the Anglican Church, trying to convert Jewish people to Christianity so that Christians can control Jerusalem in that way. And then they start mapping the land of Palestine with Hebrew place names, and this happens around with the Palestine Exploration Fund around when Herzl was about 5. And Herzl only lived 44 years. He didn't even survive until to hear the rejection of the Uganda proposal, right? But there's this pervasive idea that he somehow, as a Jewish person, had power over this empire that had been trying to take back Jerusalem for centuries, right? It's kind of ridiculous. This guy, Herzl is a Jewish journalist from Hungary. He lived in Paris. It wasn't, but the reason that he had access to empire at all is because, first of all, it suits them. It suits them to have this Jewish person advocating for what they want to. And it's great because then they have a fall guy, right? And they're yet again putting a Jewish face on their own interests. But empire was never going to say, oh, yeah, here, have this piece of land we've been trying to control for hundreds of years. No strings attached. Here, you just, out of the goodness of our heart, just take it. Right? It's ridiculous and makes absolutely no sense that would happen. So, but here we have this myth of who Herzl is, and he's the father of modern political Zionism. Not really. He's just the face of empire. He's the Jewish face that they're putting on the empire's goals for the Levant. And so on and so forth. Then you have the Balfour Declaration, which is addressed to a Rothschild, but this isn't a Rothschild that's actually interested in the family banking business at all, but it's very convenient, and it's a dog whistle to the Rothschild conspiracy, which had emerged only about 60 years before the Declaration. Balfour was straight up anti-Semite, rabid white supremacist, and he wasn't doing this again out of the goodness of his heart. He was doing it for the purposes of empire. So then World War II happens. In the 30s and 40s, a lot of places in the world closed their borders to Jewish people, and basically how we got forced into accepting Zionism as the only way. And that's when you see a lot of Jewish people start to believe in Zionism, because before World War II, the vast majority of Jewish people were not interested, because it's not part of our theology to create a state. That is Christian ideology. It's their prophecy, but it has nothing to do with us. Like, we have other requirements for the end of our exile, and it has nothing to do with creating a state, but we were forced into it, right? Now, let's not forget that a lot of Americans were aligned with the anti-Semitic beliefs of the Nazis. And again, this is an important point to make, is that there's so many tropes about Jewish money and Jewish power, and those tropes were how Hitler rose to power and was able to exterminate 6 million of us, by suggesting that it was our fault that Germany was suffering, and not at all the sanctions placed on Germany by the Treaty of Versailles, not at all the Great Depression. It was Jewish people's fault. And so when I hear people talking about the AIPAC as this foreign power and proof that Israel, which was created by the UK and the US under the guise of the UN, and not at all because, again, of Jewish power, of Jewish influence, but entirely because it serves the purposes of the Christian Empire, who have been trying to control the Levant and control the trade routes and control Jerusalem for centuries. And so just, it's like you want to say, so if this is the hand of empire, then you have the state of Israel here is very much connected. It's not this foreign power coming in and making the hand do something else. It's a finger on the hand of empire. And the same with AIPAC. It's doing the same thing, right? If you look at the things that AIPAC does, it, again, allows empire to put a Jewish face on the things it's doing itself. It's not, the empire doesn't need AIPAC. Empire can do whatever it wants, but it's very convenient to be able to blame AIPAC's influence, and and it's a foreign actor, and it should be, some people want it to be fined under the the laws that prevent foreign actors from influencing government, but these are ridiculous things to say because the call is coming from inside the house. The call has been coming from inside the house for over 900 years. And so you need to understand that the U.S. isn't some impartial, beneficial entity. It's very much connected to a very old empire. It's its own empire now. And it's serving its own purposes. So it's very convenient for empire to have AIPAC exist, but it's also very dangerous for people to ignore the influence of Christian Zionists, of empire, of, these multi-billion-dollar companies that are providing bombs and weapons and planes and ammo and everything else to the IOF in order to commit this genocide. But everyone wants to talk about AIPAC, which is on the level of millions, whereas, empire and the military industrial complex we're talking about the order of billions. But everyone's so focused on AIPAC because it can't be us, the white, the good Christians. It has to be outside. So be very careful when people are trying to convince you that AIPAC is this major player and this foreign power. It's dangerous for Jewish people and is not helping the cause of ending empire and liberating Palestine whatsoever. But I'm curious, honestly, you have to think about it. Why does the empire need AIPAC? There's nothing that AIPAC does that the empire wouldn't do without it. All right, thanks everyone. But yeah, I'd love to hear what you think. Why?